Hello everyone, welcome to the episode 4 of our All Things Supply Chain podcast. Satya brought us an interesting topic for us today. So just to give a quick overview, we'll delve into like a conceptual thing for the first few minutes, and then we'll probably talk about how this played out during COVID, and then what other factors come into play like in a real life scenario.
Hey Uday, welcome back. Great to see you. Yeah, today I was thinking that like we discussed in the in our last session about different entities of supply chain, and what I understood was like for me personally, the supply chain actually the whole supply chain, right? It all starts from how do you forecast your demand, and this is what can make or break in a company in terms of their operational cost. So so many companies, depending upon their kind of products, the business they are into, they will have their own techniques or models which actually suits their business model, and that's what they uh, rely upon those techniques, those models to predict the forecast. And this predicting demand is very critical for any business, no matter whether it's a old business, new business, or whatever it is. To larger extent, it is very important because that forecast error, right, can lead up to too much of inventories, or it can lead to stockouts,
You're right.
which can also impact the reputation of the company. So definitely the any company which will try to minimize their errors and try to be as much as close
Right.
to their prediction, right? It's very critical for them, and because it boils down to their supply chain, to the supply or the supply they are going to generate. So I
Sure.
thought it's a great share my screen. Go through different techniques or models most of the companies follow or generally, and that's what we have also read in our academic, right? So forecasting techniques, if I have to say, right, it can broadly be classified into three categories, which I call it as qualitative, extrinsic, and intrinsic techniques. Now, coming back to the qualitative technique, this basically it's they don't use any statistical model or any calculation as such, but this is broadly, and this used to happen, I believe, early on, where people used to predict the forecast based on some judgment, some sort of intuition. They used to have this customer surveys, some executive opinions. When I say executive opinions, the upper level management people come synchronize, and they come up with some numbers, right? This is more like action. So this qualitative technique, we call it as a subjective technique also, because it involves human being, right?
Right.
This is more like a qualitative approach, and this I believe used to happen a lot in the past,
Right.
and the survey still exists. The
Right.
survey still exists, and but yeah, but other things I believe it can be part of forecasting, but it won't be the only one thing that today's the company might be following. Okay.
Right.
Now, and the other thing is, the other model that I was thinking or talking about was the extrinsic technique. Extrinsic basically is, again, as I said, it could be part of the technique they might be using today, but not just the only one, right? And this
Okay.
is basically, these are basically the projections based on the external factors, and that actually impacts a company depending upon the kind of product they are into, right? For example, a company, a healthcare company, which is into let's say baby products like powder or whatever, lotions or whatever, right? So their consumption depends upon the rate at which the rate at which they have new babies, depending upon
Sure.
the geographical locations and all. So they go with that
Right.
action. They go with that approach. So this technique comes under extrinsic. And the next one I believe is the intrinsic techniques, and this is what I believe is broadly used by most of the companies, right? And intrinsic techniques is nothing but what companies these days do is they look back to their historical data, historical forecast, and based on the historical forecast, they try to predict what they can expect in the future in the future years, right? Now here the assumption is that what has happened in the past will happen in the future. That's the basic assumption they go with. And within intrinsic techniques, which basically uses the historical data, we have so many different I would say, models, and some of them being very famous, which we call it as moving averages. Moving averages is basically nothing but this actually applies to the companies where they have stable demand, or the product or the business they are into is pretty much stable, and they can pretty much rely upon their historical data to predict what their future forecast would be, where you don't expect too much of trend or
Right.
too much of seasonality, right? So it's basically useful, as I said, as you see in my slide, it's basically useful to filter out some random fluctuations, but not a very major fluctuation, right? So apart from, and moving averages is a very, I would say, very old technology when it comes to intrinsic techniques. And as I said, the business has to be very stable, right? Next is again your exponential smoothing. Now here in what happens in the word itself says that exponential smoothing. What they do is they smoothen out, any outliers as such. So what they do in this technology is that they actually try to assign low weightage to the what should I say? Uh, yeah, they basically apply low weightage to the old forecast, and latest and higher weightage to the actual demand. So when I say actual demand, something which is in the near terms, which has
Right.
happened recently.
Right.
But old forecast, when the horizon increases, let's say if I'm looking at 4-year forecast, right, I'll try to put in more weightage to my last year forecast compared to the weightage which is like 4 years back. So that's how
Right.
this exponential smoothing it comes, where with each and every year passing by, they keep changing the weightage. So this is again one of the famous techniques that is being used in the companies, which we call it
Right.
as exponential smoothing. But again, yeah, this is also most likely used in the environments where the demand is stable and not too much of fluctuation is what they expect. It's good. It's good for near-term forecast, but yeah, definitely it gets uh, highly unpredictable. When you're looking out way far.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is with exponential smoothing. And next is a seasonality. I think seasonality, yes, there are some businesses which basically whose business, we know that their demand fluctuates a lot depending upon the season, right?
Right.
So we know that there are businesses, especially, let's say someone who is into fruit business or anything or any,
Or let's say electronics during like a festival season, or let's say
exactly.
like a holiday season, there's a lot more sales
Right,
there.
right.
Right.
Like, for example, sometimes we know that gold, right? Specifically in India, also during specific months or specific this thing, they know that gold demand shoots up. All those things
Right.
we have seen this kind of different businesses. So, and even let's say if I have to talk about like especially stationary items, or be it your some electronic components, when the new grads or when the college students or students from a school, when they actually get into the new academic year, which happen mostly during June or July month, that's when you see the demand for these products going up. So
Right.
this is the seasonality.
Back to school time.
Again,
Yeah.
yes. So basically, this is again, estimate, where they try to predict the demand, how much during the season will be above or below uh, during comparing with the average demand of our product. Like for example, over a period of a year, you will have some average demand, right? But during a seasonal demand, let's say in the month of summer, in the month of winter, it can be either a high or low, right? So
Right.
that difference is what actually will tell you the seasonal index, and that's what you can see from here. Seasonal index is nothing but your period average demand by average demand for all periods,
All
right?
period. Right.
You'll take all the periods demand, and then what is the demand in that specific period is what will give you the seasonality factor. So that's
Right.
what they try to predict the seasonality factor. Similarly, deseasonalized demand is nothing but your actual season demand by seasonal index. So the seasonal index you'll take, and you will take your actual demand, and then just try to understand how basically you can leverage it out, right?
Right.
So the three techniques which I just spoke about, yes, these are intrinsic based technologies because they look back into the historical data, and this is pretty much, as I said, right, it's pretty much used in a very stable environment, stable business, the companies, the business that has been there for decades, right? So this kind of technology works out for that kind of business. However, these techniques has its own challenges where, I can say that sometimes if there is a trend in a demand, right?
Right.
Like for example, what happens is that for some businesses there can be a trend which is basically increasing exponentially, or by certain factor the demand might be increasing. So these techniques will fail to actually capture that trend, right? They will
Right.
lag behind a trend if there is a trend
Right.
actually. And that's where these techniques would be great if you are actually trying to predict future forecast. And definitely you might be either you'll be in a situation where you either, or you're basically the forecast error might be slightly high. So
Right.
such situations where you believe that the trend exists, in that cases we use this trend-based methods. And a couple of famous technology or methodologies or techniques that companies use is the regression analysis, and the other is Holt's method, right? So
Okay.
this is nothing but the time series. They basically analyze time series because they look at historical data. So these are called time series technology methodologies. Now the trend-based methods, which I just mentioned, regression analysis and Holmes method use. So apart from time series, they also take care of trend if anything exists. So this kind
Right.
of for this kind of behavior, these two technologies are pretty much used. Regression analysis, I would say, is heavily used in most of the companies, apart from Holt's method. And coming back to regression analysis, I'm sure they would have learned a lot about this. Regression analysis, as I said, it's a pretty famous forecasting technique, which basically what it does is that you have a set of data points. When I say data points, that like in the coming next 5 years, you'll predict, okay, this is what my demand would be. Let's say in first year, this is what my demand would be. Next year, this is what. So you'll have some data points, and what this regression analysis, you try to fit a straight line to all these set of data points, so that the gap between the straight line and the data points, it's very very minimal. So that's how
Right.
we come up with this optimal straight line. Basically there's an optimization involved, where it basically tries to minimize the errors. Basically takes the square of error between the straight line and these data points, so it minimizes error and comes up with a uh, model that actually fits this database. So this is more of an optimization technique which tries to predict those data points, helping in not just uh, coming up with this time series forecast, but also if there is any trend, that's what it's also try to find out. So,
Add a couple of
sure,
things
sure, sure,
to
sure, sure.
whatever like you're talking about here. I think this is a general framework and the basic
Exactly.
techniques used as a probably like a supply chain forecasting 101. I would just add one more thing. Like here, a lot of the techniques he was talking about, moving average, exponential smoothing, Holt's method. Some of these are very time series based techniques
Exactly.
where you are using like actuals and information from the past demand and trying to come up with like a forecast for the future, right? And then in certain settings, there is a possibility that you would also use or causal based models. When we say causal based models, let me give an example. So
Yes,
I think Sajja kept mentioning steady state demand, like SKU is already established, these kind of things. But let's say in a certain retail setting, you're doing like promotions, let's say in festival season, holiday season, and maybe the magnitude of promotion changes or like the pricing changes, right? So those are likely causal based events which
exactly.
cause a different kind of actual demand to come through for that season, right? So when you have certain things like that, you would apply like a causal based model.
Correct.
Maybe like you would strip out that season demand from this time series type of thing and try to do something using like a causal based type of thing. Okay. So that's something to keep in mind, like time series techniques, causal based models where there's a factor which is coming into play and which will do. And the judgment subjective thing Satya talked about, that is still used today, especially let's say you're launching a completely new product in a completely new category where you don't have any precedence, right? So then the business folks, based on their experience in like categories or consumer trends, they might make a projection on things, which is very subjective in nature. If it is a product in an existing category, they may have some precedence for like products, but otherwise, I think it could be something which is quite different. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
I think, yeah. Coming on to that point, I think the companies have become very smart, where they
right,
actually use this mixed model technique as such, because it's very difficult to use only one specific technique as such. But what they do is, like, you might have 4 to 5 different models, and this is what I've seen actually. So they use 4 to 5 different models, and these days, right? Uh, what they do is, they actually within the model also, right?
Right.
They come up with a model, and I'm not talking about when I say like within, let's say, like for example, I was talking about regression analysis. They come up with a best fit line, which actually is pretty much close to the data set of data points. So similarly, what companies they do is these days, so they every company, it's very difficult to say that okay, this is the business model they follow, or this is the kind of technique they use and all. It's a mix of all the techniques they have to use. They have to use historical trend. They have to use historical trend for which they need to know historical demand. There might be some trend that can be coming up in the future
Right.
years because we don't
Which is
know how
not
the
there.
business is
Right.
shaping up. And as you mentioned, different factors are the causal models, right? Causal
Right.
methods where you basically you need to have different functionalities, like for example
Right.
pricing functionality, shelf life functionality, marketing functionality. They have to look into all those for many different data points, right?
Right.
They have to put all those things. Okay, how my pricing can impact my demand and all those
Right.
things, right? So they basically put into all those things, and that also what they do is they come up. That also tells them, like, they use this SaaS tools and different tools they use. What they do is that it also tells you like which methodology or which model or technique tool is pretty much suits the kind of business you are into it, and it can take also a mix of all different methodologies to come up with a better
Yeah.
forecasting, right? So that's what I would say again, right? So we might see different methodologies and all, and it's very, very difficult to say, okay, this is what we can do, but
Yeah.
it's a combination
Just
of
one more
factors.
thing is like I think we have all these techniques, but depending on the kind of sector you are in and the industry and all, so how
Yeah,
people want to apply the techniques and all changes quite a bit. So what I mean by that is, see, I think we can have all the models, but in certain business areas, like it becomes very important to have some kind of explainability on like what's happening, right? So then, like a forecaster would probably take the approach which might be sometimes subjective in nature or a mix of things or a simpler model, right? So that's the thing. So it's not like we have a forecasting model, everything is automated, it's running. That's not the case, the
yes,
places
yes,
where
yes.
things are probably more matured, sometimes they're okay with it and they'll have like a set of products which are running an autopilot forecasting thing and which gets evaluated once a quarter. And there are places where it's not that way. Even though you generate like a like a forecasting model based thing, there's a lot of overlay from from the forecaster which will come into play. And then
So yeah,
and then one more thing I wanted to just talk about is like Satya talked about basic techniques here, but also there is a level of forecasting which can be different. Okay, you might do the forecasting from a tops down point of view, let's say overall product category, then product family, and then SKU level. Or you could do SKU level and then you roll up at a family level and then at a category level, right? So it could be different from both sides. And sometimes some people do like a hybrid. They would do like a tops down plus roll up where they have a tops down thing. They do a stat model from a SKU level and they try to somehow get the SKU level to be adjusted to the tops down model. So there are a variety of things which happen. And
and
then
yeah,
this is
yeah,
a
that's a good point.
very generally
Yeah,
overall
that's
forecasting is a very hairy area to tell the least.
I know, I completely agree. No matter what, you will still have some forecasting errors because one actually, predict the future.
Right,
You still might be surprised with different factors that it comes in, and the prediction actually happens based on what is the trends that you're seeing. So
right,
it's definitely difficult to
yeah,
foresee each and everything. But that's a good point that you brought. That overall, if you see that when you try to predict forecast at SKU level,
mm,
chance of you being wrong or the error will be very, very high, and that's where
right,
companies will try to look at group of families. That's where the forecast can be slightly still better actually.
right,
And this is where smart companies or the business models, right, where they're looking for commonalities, right?
right,
So you'll try to park your inventory pretty much at a high level where you have commonalities between the SKUs, so that you also try to minimize the lead time or try to minimize the lead time when you have to react to a situation where the demand is
right.
up or down. You can always go and build to that SKU, and that's where companies will try to stage or park their inventories at a level where you have a lot of commonality
No,
compared
that's
to.
a great point. I think just from I think let's take that, right? So as a topic itself, like based on the forecast, how is your supply
Yes,
chain strategy or
exactly.
various other parts of supply chains get affected, this comes into play, right? So depending on like type of products, let's say if they are products which are assembled, you might think about actually having stocking more raw materials at a common level, so that your
Yes.
overall forecast at that level might be much better at a
I think,
product
yeah,
level.
that would call
uh,
up for a separate different topic,
Topic,
especially
yeah.
how inventory optimization, safety stock,
I
and
think
based
we
on
should
that,
talk
how.
about that. So, forecasting in the how does supply chain strategy sort of connect back to forecasting? We should take that as a separate topic and
Yeah, yeah,
a deep
definitely,
dive
definitely.
like
Now
five
that,
ten minutes some other time.
yes,
So
yes,
that
yes.
so that makes sense. Let me. I'm trying to looking through like uh, what we have here. Just one more thing. I think
We can
comes
talk
to
about the bull.
we will talk about the COVID thing in a minute here. Just before that, so I also want to touch upon the concept of cannibalization, I think. So having an understanding of the forecasting techniques, this is all good, but having a really good sense of the business gets really important. As I spend more time working, it just becomes more and more apparent for me is like whatever sector in whatever your industry in, understanding the nature of the product, how is that used, what's happening is extremely important. Let me give an example. Let's say you're in a food industry, like in India you have cornflakes, various cereal, right? Let's say take a brand of cereal, and I see you're launching another like flavor, like a chocolate was already there, so you're launching a strawberry. Okay. So you will launch with some sort of initial guess and you go with it. But what happens is over a period of time, you'll have some cannibalization effect. So your chocolate forecast, which was steadily at 100, will come down to 90 because you may have stolen some customers who are eating chocolate and now they're eating strawberry. So these kind of things will happen across your product portfolio, and it can also happen across actually mix of categories. Let me give you another example. This is probably not very relevant for India, but it happened in India. For example, in US, in the yogurt category, like the curd in India, in the category itself, there was a lot of light yogurts and like flavored curds. The category was quite big. Okay. And over around 2010, 2011, there's a new subcategory which came into effect called Greek yogurt. It's like high in protein, all made with all natural ingredients, just a little bit of a fruit bottom. That's about it. It became such that became quite important for like a lot of these people who are like into fitness, and then it turned into like a breakfast item, and the Greek category started stealing share from like other breakfast categories. It could be like breakfast sandwiches, it could be like cereal and other things.
Yeah,
You
it broke
cannot
into different.
imagine the effects of that. So that's why I'm saying, so the consumer insights will know it in hindsight, but having that kind of thought process is extremely important when you're thinking of forecasting. um,
Exactly. No, that's a good
yeah.
point. That's a
And
good
then
point,
on
actually.
the extrinsic stuff, Satya was talking about extrinsic in like variables. I have a real interesting anecdote I wanted to share. Like you're talking about birth rates, right? So in my previous company, I think there was like a decline in cereal sales for a duration from 2011, 12 to 14. Okay. It was puzzling for many people to know what's happening really. We did not quite understand. We were thinking the category is losing share to someone else, right? Like some other like categories have started. They discovered after 2, 3, 4 years is kids cereal subcategory was declining. And the reason for that is because of recession in 2007, 8, people pushed out marriages. They didn't have kids. So essentially, so the kids who were born in 2009 will be like 3 years to start eating kids cereal. They wouldn't eat much earlier than that. So that had a lag effect in 2012, 13, 14 of really, you know, sort of soft, tepid cereal sales, at least in the kids category. And we found out later, much later in the thing. So this is another example like what Satya was talking about, extrinsic factors, and they come with a much bigger lag and stuff. When you're working in like big corporation things, mostly focus internally what's happening, we're scratching our heads what's going on, like somewhere the answer comes from outside. So always having that view on the business and external lens comes into play.
No, that's a very good point, actually. And that's what I was saying, right? No matter how many techniques or what level of
Yeah,
advanced techniques you might use, you still need that, some sort of insight, basically, and to see what exactly how it is going to shape up. And these
yeah.
kind of things, especially for this example, right? How basically the 2008 recession played out 3 years down the lane,
2 to 4 years, yeah. It's
yeah,
hard
decrease
to
in birth rate and impacting the forecast, right? So it's very difficult. But as you said, right, this is where human judgment, or the human insight that plays a key role. It doesn't have to be that accurate, but then that insight, a small a thought process, if someone would have thought in that direction, would have
Yeah,
really pushed the people to think in those lines. And probably those, they could have rolled out more customer surveys to understand how basically take a set of families, take a set of family as a data point, and understand how it used how the birth rate was happening prior to 2009, and let's say in 2009 2010, those indicators would have given them, okay, this is where we are trending to, right? So
yeah,
sometimes, yeah, human insight can play I think this is where the gap comes in, right?
yeah,
If you are not able to predict some of the things, like cause and effect kind of thing, right?
right.
If you I know companies, they try to predict in many different angles, but you never know. It's very
Right.
difficult to
This
cover
is
all the
another
aspects.
example, where you want to always wear a business hat, even though you work like as a supply chain person. Think about the product, think about like what the customer is using, how it will come. That's a very important thing to consider. The example. We can probably dive into the next topic, like during COVID, how things played out and what's happening and all that. If you have any examples, you can share, Satya. I'll pass it over to you first, then I'll talk a little bit from my angle, what I was doing, and some of the fascinating things I actually saw during COVID, wherever I was working on.
Well, COVID, I think it is pretty much one thing I am sure what everyone would be talking about, especially when COVID hit, right? In the news, they used to show about how in the US center, there used to be, especially in front of Walmart, or you take any big retail stores, there used to be big queue lined up, especially. And the funny the talk of the town, how the toilet, how people ran out of toilet rolls, or how the stores ran out of toilet rolls. And I don't know from where that myth came from, like everyone started piling up so many toilet rolls. And uh, and even back in India also, right? And this is something, it was like in March 2021 is 2021 is where we had started having this shutdown thing. And we were discussing in Jan 2021 that people are started piling up groceries or eatable items, because they thought that the supply chain disruption will be so much that even uh, the day-to-day items that we consume will get hit. And that's when people started piling up a lot of grocery items.
You're
And I
saying
think this.
this happened, like you're saying 6 months later, or you're saying earlier, 2020 Jan, you're talking about. I didn't understand that.
No, I'm saying in back in India, we got this shutdown. When I say
Wave
shutdown,
two.
actually,
You're talking wave
uh,
two, not the wave
no,
one.
not wave two. Actually, I was talking about. Sorry, my bad. Actually, this is back in 2020.
Yeah, okay.
2020 is when it all started, right?
Right.
So March 2020 is what I remember when we had this
I think it was
shutdown.
yeah, right.
And we all were the entire world was just seeing what is happening in China, because it hit them like 3 or 4 months back,
Yeah, right,
right?
right.
So we were all discussing, and that's when interesting point that has come in, that people were talking about back in India during Feb 2020, that we should start piling up groceries because their supply chain will get hit because of all these things. And that's when at the moment the lockdown started hitting, this impact, right? Like when someone starts talking about this, it create panics in the people. And I'm sure this happened across the globe,
Hmm.
where in front of big retail stores, people started piling up on all the groceries, be it toilet rolls, which became a funny thing at that point of time, and people started piling up, right? Now, what happened during such scenario is, it actually inflated your demand. We do now, from a supply demand point of view, if you see from a consumer point of view, right? That my supply is going to take it, the lead times are going to shoot up. And what I did was, I started placing more orders. For example, if I have to talk about myself, when I used to go to a grocery store, I used to make sure that I don't have to step out frequently. That was my one of the objectives. And if I have to stop myself going out frequently, I used to make sure that, depending on the shelf life of the products, I used to try to make sure that I get as much as stuff possible. So basically, when I used to get things just in time, I was trying to get 6 months of demand. Okay, this is what basically happened during COVID. I believe it, and across, it happened not just in consumable items. I'm sure it happened everywhere actually.
Yeah, so I
So,
think on that point, like I worked in at the time I was in the food business. I think what happened the observation is fairly clear is fewer bigger, fewer trips, but
mm,
bigger basket sizes. Just to
mm,
summarize what you were saying, that's the thing. You don't want to go
mm,
very often, but you want to bring like a lot of big basket sizes. That's what happened.
mm,
And
mm,
then the other thing is a mix shift. When I say mix shift is let's talk about this, right? Everybody was going to office. They were like probably just as an example, they were drinking coffee over there and they were probably drinking water there. They're using restrooms there. Now all of a sudden everybody stays at home. That means at home demand for everything has to go up, right? Including your kitchen stuff,
exactly,
coffee and everything. But like if you take a manufacturing company who has business, like let's say they make coffee, they make bulk coffee, big packages sent to like let's say corporations, and then they have small packs which are sent to grocery store for somebody like you to buy. Suddenly the mix shift happened, and then how can they bring in capacities with their packaging lines and everything is a big scramble for the next 6 months. That's like the biggest aspect. I'm just talking through how the supply chain gets affected, like when COVID actually comes into
exactly.
play, like back end things get affected, front end things get affected, right? Patterns go for a toss. So it's interesting. So one of the other thing we observed, I was in food business, right? So a lot of I had some accountability for like breads which are sold in like Walmart type of areas, Walmart and other retailers, right? Suddenly the breads were like going out of stock. There used to be like if you go to like a grocery store here, there is fresh breads like which are baked and set up there, and they're like packed breads because the fresh breads were like hard to come by or whatever reason, like people wanted to even store, right? So a lot of people started buying like packed breads, right? So the demand fell for the fresh doughs which go into to make the fresh bread. That's what happened. Okay. And then suddenly that bread was out of stock, like the shelf one. This went out of stock too soon. And then another, like the whiplash I'm talking about. After a month and a half, 2 months, like in US, there was a trend because you're locked down, right? In May, people were baking breads at home because they didn't have anything to do. They had to pass time. So baking bread became a fashionable thing for a couple of months. And then that went out of fashion. And then the demand came back. It's like the craziest time which
No, I
came
think,
into play.
yeah, yes, yes, the COVID thing that you brought is a very interesting topic because the whole traditional ways people were trying to predict the forecast went for a toss,
Right.
right? So, what actually, if I have to summarize it, basically, three people were trying to pull up the future demand and they started placing it now.
Hmm.
That's exactly as what has happened, and that's what has shot up the demand. You can basically call it a spike of demand for one or 2 years. That's where it remained, and companies ran into supply situations. They basically,
Right.
the whole topic, this is where the whole topic of supply chain came into the picture, because your lead times are short up. As and when your demand short up, the lead times are short up, because companies were not in a situation to meet the demand, and because of that your capacities were not in a situation to meet that demand. Your lead time short up. You can be one of the things that became famous was that your car delivery time short up to close to 1 year. Especially in India, it has happened because of lack
Okay.
of automotive chips. So you just imagine the effect. And this is a very clear case scenario, especially when the demand for car has gone up, and the delivery of cars has gone up because they lack this automotive chips. So
Right.
in a car, if you see, because you have a lot of sensors, everything, you pretty much, I would say that there's some tens or 20s or 30s automotive chips that goes in a car, right? So they definitely lack that. And in a semiconductor business, it takes time to set up capacities, it takes time to qualify those products and all those things. It's a huge 2 year cycle is what I would say, and that's where we have been in this situation. And it happened across all verticals, all different
Right.
businesses,
Right.
where your demand shot up, your forecasting techniques and all has taken a hit. And this is where we were talking about, right? Forecasting techniques are all fine, but that's where human psychology or human behavior, you never know. It's very difficult to predict, and whoever can try to, based on that new fresh set of conditions that humans have been placed in, and someone can read it. Okay, this is what I feel that the outcome of human behavior would be in this situation. I think those companies would be in a much better situation to keep their stocks accordingly, or basically minimize the forecasting errors.
So I think let me add one thing. Satya is talking about predicting the consumer behavior. He's talking about predicting the consumer behavior, but let me tell you, there's a lot of behavioral aspects which happen inside the company as well. So one thing
Hmm.
is around how does consumer behave, right? Like that's like fewer trips, bigger baskets. That's like a consumer aspect which is coming into play. But within the supply chain inside the company too, as you see these lead times like going up, right? And then like let's say one of the supplier will say, hey, I don't have enough inventory, I'm going to put you guys on allocation. Generally they say that. What that means is, let's say I have 100 units, I have 10 guys, and based on your size, like volume you do with me, one guy does 20, let's say one guy is 20% of the business, I'll give you accordingly that much. That's what he'll say.
Yeah,
Okay.
depends on customer
Yeah.
relationship.
And
Yes.
then like there are different policies on how they do allocation. There is fair and equitable. Each company does differently. But essentially all these guys, what they do is like when they order inventory, hey, if I ask 100, if I ask 40, I'll at least get 20. So they're just doing double ordering. That's what happens.
I
And
do.
then so on the upstream supply side, like the manufacturing guy, oh man, I'm getting this much demand and this much is still in the backlog. I have to keep producing and cranking out stuff. And they keep doing that. This creates the bullwhip effect, right? This guy, one guy will double order it because he wants to get so much, and then the manufacturing guy will actually say, hey, I need to produce so much, and then it goes to the manufacturer supplier, like the the components guy, or it be like the ingredients guy, he'll do more. This is the bullwhip effect we see. And then I would say, like, we studied this in the school and all this thing is there, but watching it real time, I can tell you it's a very much an organizational thing. See, when things are so bad, like you're short and you're under the gun in supply chain, especially being a cost center, nobody damn cares about, like, hey, are you actually precisely doing it? Are you going to have more inventory? They're like, get the stuff right now, right? So you want to save your own thing, so you will definitely order for more, and the bullet effect continues to add up, and it only turns at the turning point, right? At least in the US, what you see is 2021, you can clearly see this 2021, during the holiday season, Christmas, Thanksgiving, they were like, hey, you're not going to get anything, you want to order ahead of time, you'll not have a gift for the holiday season. That's the general conversation of people. And come 2022, like May, June, Walmart said they are excess inventory, Target said they have excess inventory, everybody had excess inventory. Why is that? They kept pushing, pushing, pushing. The lead times kept going up, and all of them got delivered by a delay of few months, and they came in container ships. By the time they came, the customer is gone, the game is over, right? But it's everybody knows this, but I'm telling, like, you cannot stop it easily, because organizationally, that
I know
level up, because of
that.
this power
Yeah.
play which will come into play, your business unit guy will say, what the hell, can you get me like the inventory, and like, and you're like, hey, I will take the risk of being long and not getting fired than being short and getting fired. This is what
No,
practically happens in supply chain.
there's a famous saying, right? It's always, it's sometimes it's good to be excess than being short, actually, because for being short, you sorry, for being excess you'll be beaten once, but for being short you'll be beaten every day, right?
Right.
So that's what happens. And this also pretty much exposes this theory, right, whole of long term planning and all. Your short term scenario basically beats everything.
Right.
How basically your short term demand or whatever it is happening and it's creating a havoc in the companies, this, right, they basically take that and keep it for the rest of the year, whatever the planning horizon for a company is, be it 2 year 3 year. That's the thing, that's the they think that this trend is going to continue for 3 years, and that's what they carry forward. They
Yeah.
build based on that, actually. Else, if the companies don't get panic or whatever, my xyz reason, or they don't get excited or whatever it is, right,
Right.
if they tend to put their foot and be more rational about these things, hey, this could be a short term behavior, we have to be very very
It is
cautious
very
on it.
difficult for that to
And it's very
happen
difficult,
at a very
exactly.
degree. And the reason
It's
for
very
that is,
difficult.
see, company, like, there are a lot of silos, right? Let's say there's a sales guy. He is get compensated on his top line. He doesn't care about you being having excess inventory. And when especially things are so good, booming, like, how the hell can we not inventory? He's like banging on the table asking for that. And the same with the overall company as well. A lot of public companies, you want to have a revenue line, let's go with it. And they take shots of it. And it could also, and the other thing is, you'll also have human biases, right? When things are,
Yes,
when
yes.
the going gets so good that you will believe
Definitely,
it,
you don't want to miss. You don't want to
and
miss.
you want to miss, right? So the missing out action also comes into play, because whoever had inventory, they got the good sales in retail, and the prices at that time, like when things are booming, you can sell everything at full retail price
So
and even
just
higher.
imagine, right, the cash that is going to generate for the companies, right? It's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
amazing. I'm sure the
yeah.
companies made a lot of cash. Their revenue got generated so much during that point of
Yeah.
time. And it also depends like on the companies, that even if they go wrong, they know that how they can actually absorb this shock depending on the kind of the business. It might slow down the things, but no one wants to miss out, especially when everyone is getting benefited, right? So you don't want to be the odd person out to
Yeah,
miss out on
exactly.
this.
So that's what I'm saying. So
This
it's an
behavior,
so
yeah.
in it's very difficult to get a rational acting setup unless you have full alignment across the board. And there are some companies who do that. Don't get me wrong. They are like, and this happens not so much in a supply chain context, but in other contexts I've seen. Let's say everybody is rushing to promote their products. There are some companies will say, "Hey, now the ad rates are very high. Let me not do that. I'll just wait for a bad day because that day I can get more bang for the buck." So this kind of like leadership qualities and being able to do differentiates like companies management
I
from
think,
other
yeah,
companies.
I think we can pretty much wrap up by just saying one thing is
Yeah,
that human behavior is one such interesting thing that keeps this world alive. I think,
right.
I know people are talking about chat, GPT, and all. Frankly speaking, I don't think they can predict the human behavior. Human behavior is something is like they can do things in extremely different directions, and is something that is difficult to predict. And that's what this keeps the world alive. As long as this is what keeps the world interesting. You cannot predict things, and that comes out because of human behavior, how you are going to react to such situation. Because see, we can have all this theory and all, but when you are put into that current situation, your behavior goes for a toss. And
Yeah,
you
that is why I
actually,
think, right, irrespective of whatever, like I think that's why if you take the prime example of this happens in the stock market, right? I know there's a lot of algo trading, a lot of guys who do all that stuff, but I think even then, like at least the old stock market guys and the guards, they still feel like whatever happens, the human behavior is never going to change. The fear and greed, and the market is going to oscillate between that. And you'll have some other algos, all these things here and there, but the broad aspect of the stuff never changes because that's
exactly.
hardwired into it through the evolution process. So that's interesting. So I think what we talked about here, Satya, is really great at the end of the episode here, especially on the supply chain angle, because when you go to like study in academics, like everything is like, hey, it's supposed to be this, supposed to be this, but it's not like that's not life. Life works in a company too. Not everybody is a rational actor. There are incentives, there is power play, and then there is like different kinds of like psychological biases which come into play. So that's where I think you being able to communicate clearly, talk about your assumptions in forecasting, and then sometimes showing
And definitely experience.
scenarios.
That's why experience matters a lot,
Experience
actually.
matters, and also always thinking about scenarios in a risk reward situation. Like if things
Exactly.
go well, this is what it is. Worst case is this. That's where
Right.
actually at least you can get the outcomes in a range. You can never have it perfect, but sometimes talking in that language comes with experience, especially with business folks. That'll help quite a bit because sometimes if you show, hey, if you go wrong, we can be really, really bad, then everybody is okay to pull back the forecast.
I know, and I'm sure like most of the companies, they must be having this scenarios. Hey, we might be building. What if we are actually producing more than our regular run rate, and what
Right,
if it doesn't materialize? What is that has going to happen?
right,
I'm sure the companies would have thought through about it, and they are ready to take those risks.
right, right.
But you're right. You need to have that. What should I plan B or plan C? What if it
Right.
doesn't happen? I think that's what separates for a good company
That
from a
helps
company.
them visualize like making
Exactly.
decisions too, right? Like at least avoid like the worst decisions. Yeah, somewhere in between good and bad, that's okay. I think we'll
Yes.
end there today,
Sure.
and we'll start another one next week. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Satya, for bringing this topic.